Eden Prairie, Minnesota, a peaceful suburban town just outside of Minneapolis. The kind of place where families thrive, where kids ride bikes to school, and where front doors are rarely locked. In the center of this calm, neatly trimmed town stood the Carr family mansion, a three-story, white-bricked house with tall windows and a perfectly groomed lawn. It had everything: a basketball hoop in the driveway, a rose garden out back, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind passed. Inside lived four people who, to everyone watching, had the perfect life. Dr. Alan Carr, a respected orthopedic surgeon, 48 years old, known at the hospital for his precision and known at home for his patience. Michelle Carr, his wife, former pageant queen. She had been Miss Minneapolis back in 1999, now a full-time mom, homemaker, and the face of every PTA meeting in town. Their daughter Lily was 17, bright, ambitious, and beautiful. She was a senior at Eden Prairie High School, captain of the volleyball team, and already accepted into Stanford. Their son Jacob was 14, quiet, soft-spoken, and always in his room. He liked chess, horror books, and coding. He barely spoke unless you made the first move. To neighbors, the Carrs were the kind of family you'd be jealous of. They threw barbecues in the summer. Christmas lights were always up early. Birthdays were extravagant, yet tasteful. And so there were never loud arguments, no police visits, no gossip. Just harmony. But that changed on the night of March 13th, 2018. At 6:40 p.m., the Carrs were seen on their home security footage returning from their day. Lily was carrying her backpack. Michelle had groceries. Alan looked relaxed, still in his scrubs. Jacob, as usual, was the last one in. He shut the garage behind him, then glanced at the security camera before disappearing inside. That was the last time anyone ever saw the Carr family alive. On March 14th, Lily didn't show up for school. No one thought much of it at first. Maybe she was sick. Maybe there was a family emergency. By the 15th, Alan missed a scheduled surgery at Hennepin County Medical Center. That raised eyebrows. He had never missed a surgery in his 17-year career. Michelle wasn't answering calls. Her friends texted, messaged, even rang the doorbell. No response. Jacob's school reported he hadn't attended classes. He wasn't online, hadn't posted on any forums, and didn't even log into his usual coding server. By the time Friday evening rolled around, the neighbors had had enough. One of them called the Eden Prairie Police Department to request a wellness check. 2 officers arrived at the Carr residence just after sunset. The front gate was locked. The house was dark. No movement. They knocked, rang the bell, walked the perimeter. Nothing. Eventually, they gained access through the back patio. Inside, the house was still. Too still. Dinner was still on the table. 2 plates of spaghetti. Half-eaten. Wine glasses untouched. Michelle's phone was charging on the kitchen counter. Alan's car keys were still by the door. Lily's phone was in her bedroom, on her bed, with music paused on her playlist. The most disturbing discovery was in the backyard. The Carr's white Labrador retriever, Max, was found dead, floating in the shallow end of the pool. No visible injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Just absence. Police sealed off the home. Crime scene techs moved in. Fingerprints were checked. No foreign prints. Security footage was reviewed. The last footage, 6:40 p.m., March 13th. Then, at exactly 10:23 p.m. that night, the home's entire security system went offline. Not by power outage. It had been shut off manually from the inside. The system required either a biometric scan, Alan's fingerprint, or a 6-digit passcode known only by Alan, Michelle, and Jacob. There was no activity on any of the Carr's phones after that time. No text messages. No social media posts. Bank cards weren't used. Their cars were all in the garage. Nothing. News broke by March 16th. TV stations ran the headline, "Eden Prairie Family Vanishes." Social media exploded with theories: murder-suicide, kidnapping, witness protection, even aliens. But the police weren't speculating. They were digging. On March 17th, they returned with dogs. Cadaver dogs sniffed the yard, the garden, the garage. Near the fence line, one of the dogs stopped. It began scratching at a shallow patch of dirt. Buried just beneath the soil was a single red shoelace, tied into a noose. No other evidence was found. No shovels, no footprints. It was as if someone had placed it there and carefully erased their tracks. Inside the house, they found something else strange. In the attic, hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a small speaker. It was motion-triggered, and it played music. Piano music. A loop labeled Exit Symphony, stored on a phone synced to the device. None of the cars played piano. They didn't even own one. A neighbor later confirmed she'd heard piano music around 2 a.m. the night the family disappeared. She assumed someone was having a sleepless night. It now sent chills down her spine. With no signs of life and no evidence of escape, the case officially became a multiple missing persons investigation. By March 19th, the FBI was involved. The Carr family had become the subject of national attention. TV vans lined the street. Reporters waited behind barricades. The Carr home, once pristine and full of life, now sat cold, taped off, and silent. No answers. No suspects. No bodies. Just an endless list of questions. And one chilling certainty. Something terrible had happened in that house. But what? Before we dive deeper into the investigation, the secrets, and the unimaginable truth behind this story, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. You're watching The Untold Trace, where we don't just tell stories. We expose what others are too afraid to. This is just the beginning. The Carr family was gone. No trace, no sign of life, no answers. What began as a simple wellness check had turned into a full-scale investigation. By March 20th, 2018, the Eden Prairie Police Department had turned over the case to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and the FBI. The case was no longer considered a disappearance. It was now officially labeled as a potential homicide. Inside the Carr house, investigators began a full forensic sweep. Every inch of the home was scanned for biological traces: blood, skin, hair. In the fireplace, hidden beneath ash and soot, they found something. It was a single piece of scorched fabric. Lab tests confirmed it was from a silk blouse Michelle Carr had been photographed wearing days before the disappearance. Mixed with the ashes were tiny bone fragments, too small to identify with the naked eye. But the DNA didn't lie. The bones belonged to Michelle and Alan. The living room was no longer just a scene. It was a grave. But there was still no sign of Lily or Jacob. And there were no bodies, no murder weapons, no witnesses. Detectives searched the Carr's digital lives. Alan's email had nothing unusual. His recent conversations were all work-related. He had booked a vacation for the family to Hawaii in June. There were no signs of distress or escape. Michelle's search history had been wiped. Her Facebook messages were unrecoverable. But one strange thing stood out. She had installed an encrypted messaging app on March 9th, just 4 days before she vanished. The app was deleted before police could access it. Lily's phone was unlocked. She had last messaged her best friend at 9:52 p.m. on March 13th. She wrote, "He's acting so weird tonight. I'll tell you tomorrow." She never got the chance. Jacob's phone was the most revealing. It was encrypted, password protected, and modified with custom software. It took digital forensics experts 2 days to break in. What they found would change the entire direction of the case. Jacob had joined an online community hidden on the dark web. The group called themselves the Quiet Ones. They posted fictional stories about murdering entire families, erasing their existence, and creating perfect crime scenes. But one story stood out. It was posted on March 5th, 8 days before the Carrs vanished. The title, Carnage, the Exit Symphony. It was written in chilling detail. A story about a boy who kills his family, one by one. He poisons his mother's wine. He burns his father in the fireplace. He drowns the family dog. He hides his sister in the walls. Every single detail mirrored the events that unfolded at the Carr house. The author's username? Echo_17. Jacob Carr was 17 days away from turning 15. Investigators traced the IP. The signal had been rerouted across 3 international servers, but the origin? Jacob's laptop. His room, his desk. The boy who was once described as shy, polite, and well-behaved was now the center of a homicide investigation. But there was a problem. Jacob was gone. And so was Lily. A statewide alert was issued. Photos of the siblings were broadcast across Minnesota and into neighboring states. Checkpoints were established at every bus terminal, train station, and airport. On March 24th, a gas station employee in Two Harbors, Minnesota, about 200 miles north of Eden Prairie, contacted police. He had seen Jacob 3 days earlier. He said the boy came in wearing a hoodie, paid in cash, and asked for the directions to a cheap motel. He seemed calm, polite, normal. Police traced his path and found the motel. Room 208 had been booked under a fake name. When officers entered, the room was empty. But in the closet, they found a large suitcase. Inside were blood-stained sheets, a digital camera, and a small dollhouse. The dollhouse was an exact replica of the Carr mansion, and each room carefully recreated. Tiny wooden figurines painted to resemble Alan, Michelle, Lily, and Jacob. The figures of Alan and Michelle were lying down. The figure of Lily was hidden behind a miniature wall. Jacob's figurine was the only one still standing. The camera contained dozens of photos. Some were family pictures taken in the days leading up to the disappearance. Others were disturbing. Photos of the Carr house at night, taken from inside. Photos of Michelle sleeping. Alan at his desk. Lily brushing her hair. And one final photo. A close-up selfie of Jacob. He was smiling. Behind him, barely visible in the dark, was Lily. Eyes open. Mouth taped shut. Police released the image to the public. A manhunt began. On March 30th, Jacob Carr was found in Duluth, Minnesota, sleeping in the back of an abandoned SUV parked behind a library. He didn't resist arrest, didn't run, didn't speak. He was taken into custody and transported to Hennepin County Juvenile Detention. There, during his first interview, Jacob sat calmly in front of the detectives and said, "It was the game. I won." When asked what happened to his family, he replied, "You already know." Detectives pressed further. "Where was Lily? Was she still alive?" Jacob leaned back and smiled. "She's where the story ends." A search warrant was executed at the Carr house for the 3rd time. Investigators focused on the basement. Behind the wine cellar wall, they found something new. A false panel sealed with drywall and paint. Inside that hidden space, they found Lily Carr, dead, wrapped in a white bed sheet, taped and bound. A pair of headphones still plugged into her ears. The cause of death was suffocation. She had been buried alive. The coroner's report showed she had lived for up to 3 days after being hidden. She died alone in the dark beneath her own home. The headlines were brutal. The town was in shock. How could a boy do this to his own family? What pushed him over the edge? Was he born this way, or was something missed? Jacob never showed remorse. He never cried, never confessed in full. He simply repeated the same phrase during each interview. "It was the game. I won." The Carr mansion was declared a crime scene until late 2019. It was later demolished. A memorial garden was planted on the land. But no one walks by without looking over their shoulder. The disappearance was solved. But the question still lingers: what turns a boy into a killer? And how close are we, really, to living with someone who hides monsters behind their smile? More of this chilling case continues in the next section. Don't go anywhere. This is The Untold Trace, and you've just stepped deeper into the shadows. The state of Minnesota had never seen a case like this. A family wiped out. A teenage son confessing to a series of calculated murders. and a final victim, his sister, left to die, alone beneath the very home they grew up in. By April 2018, the story of the Carr family was everywhere. National headlines, crime documentaries in production. Experts on every morning show asking the same question. Ew, why? What made Jacob Carr do it? Was it mental illness? Neglect? An obsession with fiction? Or something far darker hiding beneath his calm exterior? Jacob refused to speak further. He answered no questions about motive, no statements about remorse. He simply sat through every interview, every hearing, every evaluation emotionless. Psychologists began studying him. The initial diagnosis was disturbing. Jacob showed no empathy, no sense of right or wrong, no fear. He tested high for narcissistic traits, manipulative tendencies, and emotional detachment. He was declared a high-functioning psychopath. But he was also 14, too young for adult prison, too smart for regular juvenile detention, and too dangerous to ignore. He was placed in a maximum security youth facility. No internet, no books, no contact with other minors. Only a padded cell, routine evaluations, and silence. But outside those walls, the story wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. On April 9, 2018, a journalist from St. Paul received a mysterious envelope. No return address. Inside were 3 items: a flash drive, a handwritten note, and a newspaper clipping of the Carr mansion being demolished. The note read, "Stories don't end when you close the book. Some keep writing themselves." The flash drive contained a series of videos, 27 clips, all filmed in the months before the murders. Jacob had recorded everything. There were videos of him setting up hidden cameras around the house. One in the living room vent, one behind a stuffed bear in Lily's room, one in the kitchen cabinet above the wine rack. Footage showed Jacob observing his family. Quietly, carefully. Michelle humming as she did dishes. Alan sleeping in his recliner. Lily dancing alone to music in her room. In one video, Jacob stares into the camera. He whispers, "They think I'm just a boy, but I'm the author." In another, he films himself pouring something into a wine bottle, later identified as a rare chemical cocktail undetectable by standard toxicology screens. He had purchased the components online using cryptocurrencies. The most haunting video was dated March 13th. 10 minutes after the security footage showed the Carrs entering the house. Jacob is alone in the garage. Camera in one hand, flashlight in the other. Out, he walks down to the basement, films the false wall, and whispers, "Soon." Those videos were handed over to the FBI. They were time-stamped, authentic, and devastating. With this new evidence, prosecutors began building a case. Not just for murder, but for premeditated, ritualistic homicide. Still, Jacob was too young to be tried as an adult under Minnesota law. He would be held until the age of 21. After that, a review board would decide his fate. The public outcry was instant. People demanded life imprisonment. Others called for reform in the juvenile justice system. But no one could deny the facts. Jacob had planned everything. He rehearsed. He documented. He executed. And he never blinked. Investigators kept digging. They went through every inch of Jacob's devices. More writings were uncovered. Short stories, drawings, blueprints for the dollhouse, timelines. In one file titled "Perfect Ending," Jacob had written, "Heroes die. Monsters get away. The trick is to be both." But then, something happened that no one expected. On May 1st, a man named Darren Knox came forward. He claimed to be a former teacher at Jacob's middle school. He said he had been let go 2 years earlier for misconduct, but not criminally charged. Knox told police that Jacob had shown signs of obsession with death even back then, that he had written disturbing essays about revenge, rage, and isolation. But no action had been taken because Jacob's parents were powerful and the school didn't want attention. He claimed Michelle Carr had come to a parent-teacher meeting in 2016 with bruises on her arms. He said she never reported it, but she begged Knox to give Jacob a chance, to not label him. It was the first suggestion that Michelle may have known something was wrong, and that she was trying to keep it buried. More people came forward. A neighbor recalled hearing shouting from the car house late at night. Another claimed Jacob had once been suspended for writing a violent story about burning down his own home. But the record had been sealed. Slowly, a different picture began to form. One not of a happy, flawless family, but of a family struggling quietly, hiding something they couldn't control. Michelle had reportedly been attending therapy under a false name. Alan had written in an old journal found in the attic that he feared Jacob's behavior, but didn't want to institutionalize his own son. He wrote, "He's brilliant, but he watches us like we're not real, like we're characters in a play." In the end, that's exactly what they became, characters. In a story written by a boy who believed life was fiction, Jacob wasn't insane. He knew right from wrong. He just didn't care. To him, people were puzzles. And his family was the ultimate test. The investigation concluded that no one else was involved. No cult. No dark web hitmen. No accomplice. Just Jacob, his mind, and a chilling sense of control. In July 2019, Jacob Carr was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of manslaughter. He was sentenced to remain in juvenile detention until age 21. After that, the board would determine if he should be released, institutionalized, or transferred to adult prison. That decision still hangs in the air. A date marked on calendars for parents, survivors, and the community of Eden Prairie. A countdown they never wanted. The Carr family is gone. Their home is dust. And their story is now a cautionary tale whispered in households across the country. But Jacob's words remain, written in one final notebook recovered under a floorboard in his room. It read, "I didn't kill my family. I rewrote them. There's still more to uncover, because this story doesn't end here." The courtroom was silent as Jacob Carr entered in handcuffs. It was July 9th, 2019. He had been in custody for over a year. Still only 15 years old, he walked with confidence, eyes forward, not once looking at the crowd gathered to watch him. The room was filled with reporters, legal observers, family friends of the Carrs, and strangers who had followed the story since the beginning. They wanted answers. They wanted closure. Some just wanted to see the face of the boy who had dismantled his entire bloodline. But Jacob didn't speak. He refused to make a statement. His lawyer spoke on his behalf and entered a plea of guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The judge asked Jacob if he understood the weight of what he'd done. Jacob nodded. No emotion, no apology, no reaction. What followed was a slow, painful unveiling of evidence for the court record. Prosecutors laid it all out: the videos, the digital trail, the planning, the psychological evaluations. They showed the dollhouse. They read from his stories. They played one of the surveillance clips Jacob had set up himself, a short, silent moment where he watched Lily reading on the couch, slowly zooming in as he stood hidden behind a wall. It was haunting. Even seasoned court reporters turned away. When the verdict was handed down, there were no surprises. Jacob was sentenced to juvenile detention until his 21st birthday. After that, a psychological board would review his case to determine whether he would be released, committed to a psychiatric facility, or transferred to adult prison for life. No one in the courtroom believed he would ever be free again. But then, something unexpected happened. It was during the final court session, as the judge prepared to close the case, that Jacob suddenly raised his hand. He asked to speak. The room shifted. The judge gave him permission. And for the first time in over a year, Jacob Carr spoke publicly. He said 5 words. She wasn't dead right away. The room froze. The judge asked him to explain. Jacob leaned into the microphone and said it again. She was still breathing when I left. He was referring to Lily. Up until that moment, it had been assumed that Lily had died shortly after being placed behind the wall. But now Jacob was suggesting she had survived for longer than anyone believed. He then said something no one expected. "You buried her alive." The prosecution objected, and the court recessed in chaos. Outside, the media exploded. Headlines ran for days. Did authorities miss a chance to save Lily Carr? Was she alive while police walked through the home? Had they failed her a second time? 2 days later, a judge granted permission to unseal previously unreleased audio files from the Carr crime scene. One of the microphones used during the second search of the basement had accidentally recorded continuous audio for over 2 hours. Forensics teams combed through the sound files. At 1 hour and 12 minutes, faint tapping could be heard. At 1 hour and 14, a voice. Muffled, weak, but unmistakably human. It whispered one word, "Ain, help." That recording became a viral sensation, shared, analyzed, and debated across the internet. Lily Carr had still been alive while the search was happening. She had screamed from inside the wall, and no one heard her. It was a failure that shook the foundation of the investigation, one that reopened wounds the town was trying desperately to close. The media backlash was fierce. News anchors demanded accountability. Experts weighed in on police procedures. Former FBI agents were brought in to reanalyze the scene. The city of Eden Prairie held a press conference. They confirmed the audio was real. They admitted that during the second search, noise had been dismissed as creaking pipes. No thermal imaging had been used near the wine cellar. The false wall had blended perfectly. They had missed her. Michelle and Alan had been beyond saving. But Lily, she might have lived. In response, the Carr family's surviving relatives filed a civil suit against the Eden Prairie Police Department. The lawsuit argued that negligence led to Lily's death. It asked for changes in search protocol, mandatory use of thermal scanning in all missing persons investigations, and accountability for what they called the second murder of Lily Carr. The case sparked national debate. Podcasts, YouTube series, and crime forums lit up with anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Meanwhile, inside the juvenile facility, Jacob Carr remained silent. When asked why he admitted the truth in court, he simply said, "Because it was part of the story." Reporters later discovered that Jacob had written one final chapter in his Carnage document, a chapter that was not found on his laptop. It had been handwritten and hidden inside a hollowed-out chess piece in his bedroom, recovered months after the house was demolished. The title of the final chapter was "The Scream That Made Me a God." In it, Jacob described listening to Lily cry behind the wall. He wrote about sitting in the living room, eating cereal, while her muffled voice tried to reach him. He wrote, "I didn't need to kill her. I just needed to know she knew I could. It was evil, calculated, cold, but it was real." By the time 2020 arrived, the Carr mansion was gone. The lawsuit was settled privately, and the neighborhood had returned to something resembling peace. But the memories remained. The mailbox still stood. The swing still hung from the tree. And visitors still left flowers on the edge of the empty lot. The case became required reading in some criminal justice programs. Psychologists studied Jacob Carr for academic research, comparing him to the likes of Edmund Kemper and other juvenile killers. But unlike most others, Jacob had no trauma, no history of abuse, no obvious trigger. Just a fascination with control, a hunger for authorship, and a mind that believed life was a narrative and he was the writer. Jacob will turn 21 in less than 5 years. When that day comes, the world will hold its breath. The board will meet, the evaluations will be reviewed, and a decision will be made. But there's one question that still haunts every investigator, journalist, and family member touched by the case. What if he planned even that part? What if this entire thing, the confession, the timing, the final scream, was written in his head from the beginning? Not just the murders, but the aftermath. This story is not done, because every time someone hears Lily's voice on that audio file, every time someone visits the empty lot, every time a parent tucks their child in with one eye open, the Carr family lives again. And so does Jacob. There's something terrifying about stories that don't truly end. Years passed after the Carr family case was officially closed, but nothing about it ever really went away. Not the memories, not the evidence, and certainly not the unease it left behind. By 2022, Jacob Carr had been in custody for 4 years. His 21st birthday was approaching, the date marked in red ink on calendars of prosecutors, journalists, and every family in Eden Prairie, because on that day, a review board would decide if Jacob Carr would be released or locked away forever. In the meantime, the world outside his cell was changing. The story of the Carr family had become a landmark in true crime history, dissected in classrooms, picked apart in legal journals, and turned into feature-length documentaries. There were books, podcasts, even underground forums dedicated to the boy who rewrote his family. It became a symbol, a warning, and disturbingly, an inspiration. Because then, it happened again. In early 2023, police in Helena, Montana responded to a report of a missing family, the Lowells. 2 parents and 1 son completely vanished from their home with no sign of struggle. The house was clean. Too clean. Security footage had been wiped. Devices were missing. No phone pings, no credit card use. But what shook investigators most was what they found in the son's bedroom. A notebook. Inside, page after page, was a retelling of the Carr murders rewritten in different scenarios. Sometimes with new names, sometimes with different endings, but always with one figure standing at the end, alone. The author was 17-year-old Colin Lowell. He was found 3 days later, hiding in the attic of a neighboring house. His confession was short. "They deserved it," he said. "I made it my story." In his drawings, police found a familiar figure, a dollhouse, a nearly identical replica of the Carr family's home. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a pattern. Somehow, Jacob Carr's case had traveled beyond the walls of Eden Prairie and sunk into the darker corners of the internet. Forums that once quietly admired his intelligence had now evolved into fan communities, people who saw Jacob not as a killer, but as an architect. Some called him a genius, others a prophet. Some claimed he had started something bigger, a movement, a belief that life was fiction and death was a rewrite. Authorities discovered encrypted chat rooms where users shared plans. Some were fake, others were alarmingly real. Several posts traced back to teenagers from different states, each one referencing the Carr case, quoting Jacob's writings, and using terms like exit symphony and carnage. This wasn't just influence, it was infection. The FBI classified it as a darknet behavioral contagion, a psychological trend where a single event inspires others through obsessive storytelling and idolization. The Carr case had become fuel for an entire subculture of disturbed minds. It prompted a new round of investigations. Over a dozen cases were reopened to examine potential links to the Carr influence. But Jacob himself remained untouched. When asked about the Lowell family murders, Jacob gave no comment. When his lawyers were questioned about the growing cult-like obsession online, they denied any connection. But there was one detail no one could explain. In one of the chat rooms that investigators infiltrated, a user named Spectre0 had posted a sentence just hours before the Lowell murders were discovered. It read, "The next act begins. Let's see if they heard the scream this time." The IP address couldn't be traced. The account vanished moments later. But the language was all too familiar. Some believe Jacob Carr had somehow smuggled a message out. Others believe it was a copycat, but the timing was enough to reignite public outrage. Petitions were launched demanding Jacob never be released. Families from Eden Prairie formed a protest group. New legislation was proposed in Minnesota to allow extreme juvenile cases to qualify for life sentences. As the date of his release review approached, the pressure mounted. The psychological board assigned to Jacob's case had mixed findings. He was calm, cooperative, polite. But they also noted something chilling. Jacob never used the past tense when referring to the murders. He didn't say, "I did," he said, "I write," as if it were still happening, as if it never really stopped. When asked if he felt remorse, he answered with a smile, "I feel finished." On May 17, 2025, the board reached a decision. Jacob Carr would not be released. He would be transferred to adult custody and serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, crowds erupted in applause. There were tears, hugs, relief. Inside his cell, Jacob reportedly didn't react. He simply sat, rereading one of his old notebooks. A guard later testified that Jacob had underlined a single sentence in black ink. "Monsters don't live under your bed. They sleep in your family photos." The Carr house is gone, but the story lives in every home that wonders what darkness may be hiding just out of sight. The question has never been fully answered. Was Jacob born a monster, or was he created by silence, by looking the other way, by the masks families wear to hide what shouldn't be hidden? And what happens when the next Jacob decides to stop watching and starts writing? We may never know how many people have been influenced, how many are planning, or how many are watching this documentary right now and smiling. Because this case was never about just one family. It was about the illusion of safety. About how far horror can go when it hides behind manners, quietness, and a perfect white fence. Jacob Carr didn't just take lives. He rewrote reality. And whether you want to or not, you've now read his story. This was the horrible case of the Carr family. And this is the Untold Trace. If you're new here, subscribe now and stay glued. Because there are more stories like this, more cases buried under silence, and more monsters dressed in innocence. We're just getting started.